I declare the third work session of the 10th Summit of the Presidents of Parliaments of G20 with the topic Parliament in the Building of a Global Governance Adapted to the Challenges of the 21st Century. We have here at the table Ms. President of the Parliamentary Union, Tulia Axon. Dear ladies and gentlemen, chiefs of delegations and dear parliamentarians, the international system faces a multi-faced crisis in the geopolitical, economic, and environmental areas. To face systemic challenges in a productive and effective way, it is key to reform the mechanisms and institutions of global governance, increasing their representativeness and legitimacy and work. In this purpose, the reform of the UN and especially of the Security Council seems crucial for sustaining peace and international peace and security, and for the promotion of sustainable development that is inclusive and fair. Likewise, the institutions of the international financial system, such as the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, have to improve their decision-making process, and engage in the combat to inequalities and the transition to sustainability, driving their financing mechanisms to promote economic and social advancements with environmental commitment and attention to the inequalities in the national context. The relation of the trade with sustainable development and the World Commerce Organization, and the strengthening of the trade in the world and sustainable development and the investment agreements, the participation of women in international congresses and international trade, and the approach of sustainable development in regional agreements of trade are some of the topics that are being debated to enhance the governance of international trade in order to have it more open, fair, and sustainable. For all this, we need to discuss the crucial role of the parliaments in this movement, whether it is in the participation in international organizations or in the approval of international agreements and the harmonization of public policies in the national scope. Having done these general observations, I have the satisfaction to hand the floor to Mr. Numan Kurtulmuş, President of the Parliament of Turkey.
Sayın Başkan, Distinguished Chair, distinguished heads of parliaments of G20 countries, distinguished members of the international community, good morning, everyone. Yesterday we have held 2 sessions and we have tackled very important topics. And today we will be talking about building a new global governance in the 21st century. So I wish everyone a very fruitful session today. So essentially, today there are things that people are faced as challenges, and this is relevant to the presence of international organizations. We have FAO in food, we have WHO, we have the International Court of Justice, we have the UN Security Council, and we have many international organizations. Despite that, challenges are not being solved. So these organizations are basically just on paper, so they no longer have the capacity to solve the problems. Therefore, the issue is not only to strengthen the institutional capacities, but it is mainly about having a fair and an egalitarian international order. So we have to be able to put forth our views and opinions. So within this framework, tackling international organizations one by one, rather than doing that, we have to look at the root causes of the failure of the international order. In order for international organizations to succeed, stability, legitimacy, and safeguarding are the three main issues. The majority of international organizations, mainly the UN, have lost these three concepts, or their strengths are eroding. And the climate crisis that we are faced with, we have migration, we have hunger, and we have international conflicts. In order to solve all of these issues, the main thing is not only the incapability of these organizations, but their paradigms have destroyed, unfortunately. Therefore, the first thing to do is to restructure these international organizations to establish a fairer and a more transparent global political architecture. That's why we need a change of mindset. We need to change of the paradigms. Within this framework, we have to clearly see the wrongs in today's international order so that we don't face these challenges in this new system. So today's world system is looking out for the rights of the strong. The rights and the interests of the strong, of the powerful, is being safeguarded. So we need a paradigm shift, and if this is going to happen, the first prerequisite is to make sure that we safeguard, we protect the rights of those who are weak. The second one is that those who think that they own the world should not do that. No one owns the world. This is a joint platform. This is a joint home for 8 billion people. That's why if the principle is that people are equal from birth, another thing is that hegemonic worlds and hegemonic countries and weak countries, we shouldn't have that kind of a separation. Today, we need to consider that nations and countries are equal in sovereignty. Within this framework, in order to establish a new world system, as the international countries, communities, we need to find solutions. The Israel's genocide that is ongoing in Palestine, the massacre that we see, is an alarm bell for us to establish a new world order. We don't have time anymore. The time is running out. So this is not a world. We need to end the period where the strong powers do everything they want. That's why, before all else, we need to set up a new global political architecture, and we need to start doing that with restructuring the UN Security Council. The world should not be left in the hands of 5 countries. That's why, within the sovereignty of all countries, we have to safeguard the justice and equality for 8 billion people. We have to work towards establishing the system together, and first thing we need to do is that the UN Security Council is changed and revisited and redesigned once more, and we will do our best to do that. The speaker has been cut off, so the interpretation cannot be provided. Thank you.
Next speaker, to take the floor, Mr. Lindsay Hoyle, President of the Lower Chamber of Parliament of the United Kingdom.
President. This very important conference that we know is allowing us to come together, the P20 and the IPU. It is my pleasure again to speak. The fact we're all here together is a testament of power of multilateral system. There is pressure to reform governance to make it more inclusive. I know the United Kingdom wants to see improvements. We need to ensure that when collective global action is taken, all voices are heard. But we are presiding officer of our parliaments. The lead in discussing reforms to the global financial system or the UN Security Council is by governments. What is Parliament's role in conversation? Let me first acknowledge the difference between parliaments and different roles and responsibilities. There is no single way in which a parliament will influence discussion of global reform or way in which international agreements are made. But we all have in common is that we are a place where many voices in our own countries are heard. A good parliament has a wide representation. We all have different electoral systems, but parliament contains representation from across the entirety of the country they serve. Every region, every district is represented. That regional dimension is very important, but it is not the only kind of diversity we need. I know there is a general commitment to enduring representation from across society. Only this July G20 meeting of women parliamentarians held here in Brazil noted the need to ensure that women were represented in electoral positions and suggested that temporary measures such as quotas might be needed. Not that long ago, if you were told someone was a member of the United Kingdom Parliament, yes, the House of Commons, you would know they were almost certainly white, male, and very probably Christian. That law was changed to allow parties to impose all women shortlist if they wished, a law that continues in force till 2030. I'm pleased that the number of women in our House of Commons has increased steadily. In the last general election, 263 women were elected, making up 40% of the total of MPs in Parliament. And ethnic makeup of our chamber has changed. As headlines proclaimed, this is the most diverse parliament ever in the United Kingdom. Parties no longer need to use the law on shortlist. It's normal for an MP to be a woman, an atheist, to be a Sikh, a Muslim, an Hindu. It doesn't matter what religion you are. It is normal for an MP not to look like me. As I've been told, you might be better off not being. The Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Leader of the Opposition show how things have changed. They show just how normal it is to be a woman in politics in the United Kingdom today. But the election to Parliament alone is not enough. Parliaments need to hear the voice of everyone represented within them. It's no good being elected if you're shouted down or if you're speaking inside Parliament, risk the security from outside. Again, the women parliamentarians spoke wisely in warning against gender-based political violence. The United Kingdom experience shows women MPs face an extraordinary amounts of abuse. It's not just for them, it's for all politicians. Even those who are just candidates face abuse in the real life of politics today. That is why I've supported a Speakers' Conference, supported by all our political parties, to look into the risk, including the risk of foreign states who somehow feel it is their right to interfere in democratic process. Because if we cannot hear from a wide range of people within our parliaments, they cannot communicate with people outside Parliament. How can we support or challenge government which approaches the international reform? By definition, Parliament is a place for debate within Parliament. There will be many different views on what sort of global reform must be effective. Emotions run high, but we have a framework to keep debate constructive. All of parliaments will need a place where reforms can be debated, and we have responsibility to monitor and challenge what is being proposed. But also, the role outside Parliament I'm a great believer in the parliamentary diplomacy. Just within our own institutions, we can learn from each other, though debate and challenge, so we can gain a great deal of understanding about perspectives of colleagues from around the world, finding out what we see difficulties when they see the opportunities. So please, we must keep that discussion going. Let us ensure that democracy survives. Democracy is the answer for Parliament. More democratic parliaments, less dictatorships. A global governance only works if parliaments are not giving autocrats credibility for being vile of democracy. They don't like that veil of democracy being challenged. Well, I say now, democracy is the only answer to dictatorships. They are the answer for us all. A democratic world, a free world, not a divided world which allows parliamentarians with democracy to challenge the dictatorships. It should be democracy across the world, an equal world for all. Thank you.
Queria, antes do próximo orador, registrar a presença em plenário do embaixador da Itália, Mário Cortese, do embaixador de Portugal, Luís Faro Ramos, e do embaixador da Turquia, Aliu Ibrahim Aksa. Próximo orador inscrito. Presidente da Câmara Baixa do Parlamento da Itália, senhor Lourenço Fontana.
Obrigado, grazie Presidente, ringrazio lei. Buongiorno a tutti, ringrazio lei, ringrazio il Presidente del Senato federale, ma siamo qui anche per ringraziare il Brasile. Oggi ci troviamo qui a 150 anni dall'anniversario dell'immigrazione italiana in Brasile. Pensate
we are celebrating the 150th anniversary of Italian immigration to Brazil.
Di persone con origine italiana che stanno qui in Brasile.
30 million Brazilians of Italian descent living here in Brazil.
Tutte queste persone di origine italiana.
Each of all these people of Italian descent, together in spite of their difficulties, they have made a huge contribution to life in Brazil and to Italy as well. And we attach great importance to this. As has been recalled, we're meeting here in Brasilia today, only a month and a half after the adoption in New York of the United Nations Pact for the Future, which expressly recognizes the role of Parliament in the construction of global governance. This is an important signal of attention, which is still tentative and therefore worthy of further developments. The current international context is uncertain, characterized by new threats to peace and security, and this requires political solutions that can address the root causes of instability, from Ukraine to the Middle East, from Africa to the Indo-Pacific. We cannot resign ourselves to living in a world where wars, conflicts, and inequalities undermine the dignity of individuals and the identity of peoples. Joining forces to achieve peace and mutual respect is a fundamental objective. Parliament must promote ever closer linkage with the United Nations, whose reform can no longer be postponed, as the current structure is not capable of guaranteeing the implementation of the principles of peace, equality, and freedom enshrined in the San Francisco Charter, which will celebrate its 80th anniversary next year. In this regard, I would like to recall the words of Alcide de Gasperi, the Italian statesman who at that time was one of the prominent personalities leading Italy's rebirth from the ruins of the Second World War. The future, he said, will not be built with force, not even with a desire to conquer, but through the patient application of the democratic method, with spirit of constructive consensus and respect for freedom. In every international forum, Italy has always remained faithful to this approach, and this year, during its rotating presidency of the G7, it has recalled the need to uphold a set of shared values to build development and growth. But we must move from words to deeds, and we should promote the system of multilateral relations. I would like to put forward some proposals to address the representative deficit that is at the basis of the widespread climate of distrust towards the architecture of international organizations, which are considered to be less responsive to political and economic challenges and, in general, to the most urgent issues. First, further enhance the parliamentary dimension of the G20, as the Brazilian presidency has begun to do by convening the first forum of women parliamentarians of the G20, and then to enhance the role of parliaments so that parliaments can ensure that their role is not limited to the subsequent ratification of international conventions, but can participate in negotiations from the very beginning. To include a parliamentary segment into the calendar of the inaugural week of the UN General Assembly every year in September. Parliaments are the natural place to build the future of peoples because they encompass political, social, and generational pluralism. And parliaments should be the first institutional bodies to take up the challenge launched by the United Nations with the Declaration on Future Generations. I hope that this declaration will become the subject of in-depth reflection within parliaments that we represent, because there are essential objectives that should not be taken for granted. The role of family, protection of the environment, protection of cultural diversity, solidarity between generations, and the importance of leaving no one behind, starting from people with disabilities. I would like to thank the presidency and my colleagues for having accepted in the final declaration my proposal to dedicate a paragraph to people with disabilities, underlining the need to develop their autonomy and talent. And let me call upon all the people of goodwill, who are so many among us. We all attach great importance to our planet and to the future of our children. We are all linked by shared values and concerns. If we all act with goodwill, we can take care of the future of ourselves and our children based on peace and prosperity. Thank you all.
Próxima a ocupar a tribuna, a senhora Puan Marahani, presidente do Parlamento da Indonésia.
Excellencies, war, conflict, and geopolitical tension continue to pose serious threat to peace and international security. Climate change and major power rivalry, global fragmentation have further worsened the situation and caused more uncertainty. The world has been in constant alert. All these prolonged global problems have raised the question of the relevance of the current global governance. International community needs to mobilize global action to tackle these problems. However, instead of strengthening international cooperation for united action, some countries undertake unilateral action and even neglect international law and the United Nations Charter. This is what we have seen in Gaza, where the call by international communities to end the war is neglected by Israel. Global governance today is not fit for purpose to resolve current global problems. 21st century problems need 21st century solution. Today's problems are different than challenges in the past. We have entered the multipolar world where no single country can solve global problems alone. But multipolarity could create more uncertainty and complexity without agreed rules of engagement. To contribute in solving our common concerns, we have to establish the G20 as the main forum of international economic cooperation. We have many more players now, including middle powers and developing countries, but more players does not guarantee that we can manage all global concerns. The only way to manage the complexity is through a reform and strong multilateralism. This will avoid further fragmentation and polarization among countries. With all this in mind, we have to ensure the current global governance, especially the UN, can cope with the 21st century challenges. To be more relevant, the UN must be able to meet the needs of the people. Various international problems, such as global warming, have resulted in negative impact to the people that we serve. Our constituent demand the UN to contribute to solve rising food and energy prices and even enhance quality education. Global problems need global solutions. Government alone is not enough to solve today's complex global challenges. Therefore, we need more active Parliament to be part of the solution. Parliament should contribute to build trust that is needed to reform global governance. Parliament have to reaffirm their commitment to international law and the UN Charter as the guiding principle of the interstate relation. We have to uphold multilateralism and resist the temptation to pursue unilateralism. We, as parliamentarians, must contribute to strengthen global governance that is relevant to 21st century situation. 21st century global governance should be more representative, effective, democratic, and accountable. This is why we need to reform the UN Security Council, UN General Assembly, and international financial institutions. In this regard, Parliament should be at the forefront to defend the value of democracy at the national level and also the global stage. This is where parliamentary diplomacy can play a more critical role in bringing the interests of the people to the global stage. Parliamentary diplomacy should contribute to create lasting peace by resisting the use of force in resolving the dispute, and parliamentary diplomacy should work more closely with the government to build strategic trust to solve polarization among countries. To conclude, let us collaborate to enhance global governance through parliamentary diplomacy so it will reflect the interests of the people. Thank you.
Próxima oradora a usar a tribuna, presidente do Parlamento de São Tomé e Príncipe, senhora Selmira Sacramento.
Muito obrigada, senhor presidente. Saúdo a todos e a todas e todo o protocolo observado. A administração dos assuntos internacionais constitui um meio indispensável para assegurar a cooperação entre nações em áreas como economia, segurança,
The administration of these international matters constitutes an indispensable means to assure the cooperation between nations in areas such as the economy, security, the environment, human rights, and the significant evolution in the way in which the nations interact and can be observed since the Conference of Bretton Woods, which led to the creation of institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and the modern dynamics of the G20. The climate crisis, social inequality, forced migration, the arrival of new pandemics, and disinformation are just a few of the challenges that surround us. Even then, despite the severity of these problems, we have a unique opportunity to transform the way we govern. And in this context, we, parliamentarians, have a fundamental role to play. We should, therefore, emphasize the reinforcement of international cooperation which we have established, reflecting an exchange of best practices, working side by side, both developed and developing countries, to maximize the gains of the progress and guarantee that no one is left behind. In doing so, we create not only stronger bonds between our nations, but we also build a solid foundation for a more prosperous future. It is equally important that our parliaments are dedicated to the inclusion of new government perspectives, given that the world that we live in is not homogeneous. We should foster voices from emerging countries and developing countries in our decision-making tables. After all, a truly effective international regime represents the diversity of experiences and needs of all its members. Therefore, we should reject unilateral practices that oftentimes perpetuate inequality, embrace plurality, work in the creation of norms and standards in common that may be followed by all parliaments in collaboration with international organizations to guarantee the active participation of all member nations in the negotiations that conduct to the definition of principles that are widely acceptable. Therefore, we should guarantee that our internal legislations are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, contributing, therefore, to a global agenda that seeks collective welfare. Inspired by our values of humanity and solidarity, may this event be a mark in our trajectory, preparing the path ahead of us for a new governance model. Thank you very much.
Próximo orador à tribuna,
next speaker will be the President of the Parliament of Portugal, Mr. José Pedro Correia Aguiar Branco.
Senhor Presidente,
Mr. President, I'd like to thank the Brazilian Congress for an excellent welcoming and also the exemplary manner of conducting our works. I'd like to share with you some important topics. The first one is to keep everything as it is not an option. The current challenges and the future challenges are not resolved with old responses. We need new responses. The adaptation of architecture of the rules in the international level to face the new challenges is inevitable. We all know that it is this way. We should not pretend that everything is the same. It is necessary to have bigger representativeness of people, including through the access of women in decision-making roles and a bigger inclusion of the different countries and regions of the world in a way to provide a more legitimate and architecture, a better architecture to the world order. The climate crisis, the digital revolution, the struggle against hunger and inequality are some areas that need new approaches. The people around the world need responses. People matter. The UN itself acknowledges the need for change. The Summit of the Future, carried out in September this year, shows paths that should be taken. And it includes the reform of the Security Council of the UN. Second point is the parliamentary diplomacy, which as a tool to be used. In the world, we have extreme positions and initiatives that promote and build bridges. Are necessary exercises, such as this summit here of P20, are necessary for fostering the empathy and respect and accepting differences. Here, the parliamentary diplomacy gains relevance as a complement of the executive power. There's an aspect that is common to all parliaments. They are, by excellence, the houses of dialogue. We are here, and we come from different regions with different contexts. We, parliamentarians, we are the product of different political systems. We have different responses and visions. Aware of these differences, we have to be aware, we have to be able to find ways for dialogue with the goal of knowing and understanding the differences. From our side, we don't want to give lessons to the world, but we advocate for democracy and individual freedoms. We know that representative democracy is the best solution to contain within the parliament the confront of ideas in favor of social stability and respect to individual. The scenario of fragmentation that we see in different countries, including Portugal, the parliament, they have a centrality that is very relevant, as well as the parliamentary diplomacy. The third point is to have an international order based in international law and the human rights. An international order that is anchored in international law is always better than an order based in the law of force. We can show flaws regarding the implementation of international law. We can even disagree concerning some specific aspects in this international order. But one thing is for certain, the world without rules based in the law of the strongest, it cannot be the option. Therefore, referring to the conflicts that go beyond their borders in the case of Ukraine and also Gaza, we should not and we cannot be complacent. We need to condemn what has to be condemned: the violations of territorial integrity, violations of human rights. If we do not do this, we will undermine one of the biggest accomplishment of humanity, a world based in rules. This is why we should not agree in exchanging international law for vain promises of peace and prosperity. We need peace in Europe, in the Middle East, and in the region of the Great Lakes. For this, we need to work together, but always guided by respect of international law. Dialogue, always. Change, inevitable, but never accept accept the threat to the world of rules and respect to the human beings. Thank you so much.
Before I give the floor to the next speaker, I'd like to give a piece of information to everyone present, that as soon as the present session is over, we will begin the closing session of the 10th Parliamentary Speakers Summit of the G20. The next speaker, the President of the Singaporean Parliament, Mr. Changpeng Shah.
Distinguished colleagues, good morning. We convene today at a pivotal moment in history to address the vital issue of global governance for the 21st century's challenges. As we gather here, our world faces profound challenges. From the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza to the ever-present threat of climate change. Our world stands at a precarious crossroads, marked by escalating conflicts and intensifying rivalries. The international landscape has grown increasingly unpredictable and fractured as we navigate the shift from a unipolar to a complex multipolar global order. In this new reality, the role of parliaments in forging a robust global governance system has never been more critical. As legislators, we shoulder a unique responsibility to forge a new path of global cooperation and governance, particularly by reinforcing the principles as enshrined in the United Nations Charter. We must be the architects of a new global order that can withstand the storms of the 21st century. The pressing need to reform multilateral institutions has never been more apparent. Allow me to outline several crucial considerations. Reforming global institutions. First, even as we look at reform of global institutions, we must continue to reinforce the primacy of international law and the United Nations Charter, including key principles such as sovereign equality. They form the bedrock of a rules-based multilateral system, which is especially crucial for smaller nations like Singapore in ensuring equitable global participation. We need to revitalize the World Trade Organization. We must maintain the core functions of the WTO and work towards the restoration of a fully functioning dispute settlement system. The WTO's rules must be regularly updated to ensure it remains relevant in a rapidly changing global economy. We must also embrace flexible multilateralism. We should exercise flexible multilateralism and explore creative modalities that will allow members who are ready to move forward on important issues, but in an inclusive manner that allows others to come on board when they are ready and willing to do so. This is exemplified by the joint statement initiatives at the WTO, such as the one on e-commerce that Singapore is a co-convener of. We must also navigate digital and sustainable revolutions. We must develop new frameworks that govern digital and sustainable economies, following models like Singapore's Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. As parliamentarians, we carry a responsibility that extends beyond our borders. We must strengthen our ties with global institutions, ensuring they work for all nations. Foster networks that enable collaborative problem solving. Advocate for legislation that supports sustainable development and human rights. Pursue economic partnerships that address global issues like climate change. Our role is not only to oversee and legislate, but also to serve as advocates for a more representative and responsible global governance structure. As legislators, we are more than observers. We are participants in shaping the global order. We are the bridge builders between the local and the global, translating the aspirations of our constituents into concrete actions on the world stage. The time has come to reinvigorate multilateralism and fortify the role of the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and other global institutions as vehicles for peace, sustainable growth, and shared prosperity. It is also timely to look into how these multilateral platforms can better address both current and future challenges. Singapore, as a small state but committed member of the international global community and deeply invested in the rules-based international order, we stand ready to contribute to these efforts. In conclusion, while the challenges we face are great, our collective potential is much greater. By working together, by reforming our institutions, and by staying true to our principles, we can build a global governance system that is more just, more resilient, and more prepared for the challenges of the future. Thank you very much and have a great day ahead.
Próximo orador à tribuna, vice-presidente do
Next speaker at the
Parlamento da
tribune,
China,
Vice President of the Parliament of China.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to attend this G20 Parliamentary Speakers Summit held in the beautiful city of Brasilia. And I also thank Brazil for the thoughtful arrangement. The world is undergoing great changes in a century. We're facing a changing and a turbulent world. Challenges of insecurity, imbalanced development, ineffective governance, and a sluggish economic recovery are increasingly prominent. Peace, cooperation, and win-win cooperation have become the common aspiration of the international community. Against such backdrop, the P20, themed by Parliament for a Just World and a Sustainable Planet, is of high relevance. G20, as the major forum for international economic cooperation that brings together the world's major economies, should stay true to its founding mission, strengthen solidarity and cooperation, jointly address challenges in our times and promote development and prosperity for all countries, and support the vast developing countries in embracing a journey toward modernization. We believe the legislatures have the responsibility and the capacity to play a positive role in building country-to-country relations that values equality and mutual trust, expanding development cooperation that is mutually beneficial and win-win, promoting open, inclusive communication and mutual learning. China values this platform and supports Brazil in hosting the 10th P20 and is ready to enhance cooperation with all parties. We call on all parties to build a consensus of development to promote global development. China supports the G20 in continuing focusing on development and providing political support for the development of the world. This is also the common aspiration of the Global South. China also supports the G20 in carrying out cooperation on the Global Alliance against hunger and poverty proposed by President Lula.
We call on all parties to deepen pragmatic cooperation and promote sustainable transition. China supports Brazil in taking sustainable development as a priority of the Rio Summit and supports the G20 in deepening cooperation in such areas as energy transition, technological innovation, and digital economy to help developing countries equally benefit from digital divides. We call on all parties to pursue win-win outcomes for all and improve global governance. The G20 needs to uphold true multilateralism, safeguard the international system with the UN at its core, the international order underpinned by international law, and the WTO-centered multilateral trade regime, and actively advance the reform of the global financial architecture. We call on all parties to build partnership and jointly address global challenges. We need to continue to carry forward the spirit of partnership, keep to the G20 mission as a platform for international economic cooperation, strengthen micro-policy coordination, build an open world economy, and work together toward the real vision of a just world and a sustainable planet. Colleagues, friends, currently China is now working to further deepen reform comprehensively to advance Chinese modernization. We will surely inject stronger impetus into the common development of the world and make greater contribution to the progress of humanity. China's National People's Congress will continue to strengthen cooperation and exchanges with legislatures of all countries and contribute to building a better world and a community with a shared future for mankind. I thank you all.
Próximo orador a ocupar a tribuna, o vice-presidente da Câmara Alta do Parlamento da Índia, senhor Shri Harivansh.
Honorable Chairperson and distinguished delegates, the crucial role that Parliament can play in shaping and strengthening global governance can hardly be overemphasized. We are standing at a critical juncture confronted by unparalleled crises, climate change, economic inequality, geopolitical tensions, food and energy security, and technological transformations. These challenges transcend national borders and demand a united global response rooted in equity and fairness. To navigate these challenges, global governance structures must evolve to address the profound shifts in global power dynamics, economic structures, and socio-environmental challenges. Since its inception, the members of the United Nations have increased fourfold, which reflects its vibrant diversity. However, the institution remained short of needed reforms all this time. As a result, the UNSC struggles to fulfill its mandate of maintaining international peace and security, undermining its effectiveness and credibility. India strongly advocates for the reform of the UN Security Council to make it more representative, especially with the greater inclusion of the Global South. We in India will continue to lead efforts towards comprehensive reforms of the United Nations, including through expansion of both categories of membership of the UN Security Council in order to make it more representative, effective, and credible. This is a key component of our Prime Minister's call for a reformed multilateralism that reflects today's realities, gives voices to all stakeholders, addresses contemporary challenges, and focuses on human welfare. The second issue is the reform of the international financial architecture. The Bretton Woods institutions, IMF and World Bank, must be restructured to reflect the needs and priorities of developing nations. In addition, financing and investment gaps of SDGs, estimated at up to $4 trillion annually, needed to be addressed urgently. In this regard, significant strides were made during India's G20 presidency, with G20 leaders calling for better, bigger, and more effective multilateral development banks to scale up development from climate finance from billions to trillions. It is appreciable that this momentum has continued under Brazil's presidency. The third crucial issue is reform of the multilateral trading system. India remains unwavering in its commitment to a rule-based, non-discriminatory, fair, open, inclusive, equitable, and transparent multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization at its core. In India, our government is at the forefront of driving financial inclusion programs, rural development schemes, and social welfare projects, which have empowered millions, particularly those at the margins of society. Our parliament recently passed the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, which provides for reserving 1/3 of seats for women in the Lok Sabha and its state assembly. This landmark decision will go a long way in transforming India into an equitable, gender-sensitive, and all-inclusive nation. India has been at the forefront of climate action through initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster-Resilient Infrastructure, and Mission Lifestyle for Environment. Dear delegates, while digitalization offers immense opportunities for growth, innovation, and inclusion, it also presents new challenges, particularly for developing nations. It is imperative that global governance framework adapt to these new realities by ensuring that all nations, regardless of their economic standing, can harness the benefits of technological advancement. Distinguished delegates, India has always believed in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family. The ethos is central to our vision for global governance, one that is responsive, representative, and resilient. As the representatives of our people, the parliamentarians have a collective role in reforming global institutions and promoting governance structure that are not only robust but also effective, inclusive, balanced, and oriented towards sustainable development. I sincerely thank the National Congress of Brazil, the government of Brazil, for their warm hospitality and organizing this conference quite successfully. Thank you.
Próxima oradora a ocupar a tribuna,
next speaker,
vice-presidente do Parlamento Europeu,
the Vice President of the European Parliament, Ms. Crystal Schermus.
Yes, parliamentarians. It is an honor for me to join you today on behalf of the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, to speak about how we parliamentarians can help rejuvenate global governance. First, let me remind you of the challenge. Multilateralism was one of the 20th century's greatest success stories. It was an answer to the brutal world wars. Our ancestors made a choice to join forces in diverse assemblies to negotiate rather than obliterate. The United Nations was the premier example of this spirit. The European Union was launched in the same spirit as was the African Union and ASEAN. For decades, our societies benefited from the efforts to work out common solutions together. But for many people today, the 20th century and its great projects are beginning to seem slightly antiquated. Structures that seemed so consensual when they were first made are less so now. Majorities are still possible, but come with a price. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused enormous rift, not only on Ukraine's sovereign territory, but also on the multilateral forums. The UN General Assembly has resoundingly condemned the war. but we have seen camps form around votes. The UN Security Council has, unfortunately, become another amplifier of differences. Even with its limited membership, the Council is paralyzed. Since 1991, Russia has, for example, used its veto 35 times, far more than any other permanent member. This has meant, among other things, that the UN peacekeeping missions we could and should have sent are not deployed. The international financing institutions are also facing their own call for reforms, calls for a more diverse input and more effective output. This is our challenge. Then what is our solution then? The solution is not to dismantle these structures. The solution is not to create a glut of the 21st century alternatives while leaving the old forums to decay into irrelevance. But reduce, reuse, and recycle are words that we are learning to live by today in order to protect nature. We can also apply them to global governance. Let us reuse and recycle the multilateral forums we have, while reducing bureaucracy and procedural burdens. In this process, we parliamentarians have an essential role to play. If there is one skill we have developed, that is one of finding workable solutions for our diverse constituencies. My own, the European Parliament, is the only directly elected, multilingual, multi-party, transnational parliament in the world. We parliamentarians scrutinize our governments. Sometimes we contest their actions, but always with our citizens in mind. This seems to me to be the blueprint for reforming the multilateral system by involving parliaments more directly in the structures of global governance. Our own forum here is one example of a good structure that could be reused and even expanded. For instance, including the African Union has been a very important step in that direction. Another step would be creating a UN Parliamentary Assembly. This assembly could facilitate structured exchanges of ideas amongst elected representatives from around the world. It would make decision-making more transparent by placing the responsibility on us, democratically elected parliamentarians, to explain what we're doing and how we vote, and also to connect more directly with citizens. This would help us reinvigorate multilateralism. We need to repair it. We need to adapt it to the current challenges and conflicts that we are facing today. So, dear parliamentarians, I hope that you will join me in pushing for a more democratic, upcycled form of global governance. We truly need it, but we need also to connect with citizens. So therefore, this is so important. Thank you very much for today.
Aproveito também para
I'd like to
registrar a presença
refer to the presence of the ambassador of the United Kingdom, Stefano Cadi, and the ambassador of Mozambique, Jacinto Mangumi, and ambassador of Canada, Emmanuel Kamar Yenex.
The next speaker is the Vice President of the Lower Chamber of South Africa, Ms. Annelie Lotriet.
Parliamentarians. South Africa welcomes the ongoing discussions regarding the reform of global governance institutions, aiming to enhance their inclusivity, legitimacy, and functionality. The existing state of affairs has allowed influential nations and aligned partners to diminish and immobilize multilateral global governance institutions, leading to a failure in executing their mandates. The United Nations Security Council currently faces a state of paralysis. This is primarily due to the dominance of a few powerful nations within the Council disregarding the impact of their decisions on numerous lives affected by devastating conflicts worldwide. This is evident in the ongoing conflicts in regions such as the Middle East, Sudan, the eastern part of the DRC, Russia, and Ukraine. To make the Council more effective and representative, South Africa reiterates the African Union position articulated in the Eswatini Consensus, which advocates for Africa's representation on the Council through 2 permanent seats and 5 non-permanent seats. We also advocate for the abolishment of the veto power. Historically, the veto power has been misused to disempower countries, undermining the Council's capacity for fair decision-making and often obstructing critical actions on matters of global importance. South Africa extends its appreciation to the permanent Council members who support its reforms. It is our hope that their stance will be emulated by other members to improve the Council's effectiveness and to render it more representative. In this respect, the G20 parliaments also have a role to play. By actively engaging with our respective UN ambassadors and foreign affairs ministers, our parliamentary committees can ensure that parliamentarians are involved in and well informed about Security Council reform discussions. Our parliamentary influences can steer our nation's stance on this critical global issue. Furthermore, there is a pressing need for reform within the global economic governance system, particularly within the World Trade Organization. South Africa supports an open, inclusive and transparent process for WTO reform, ensuring that the interests of all, especially those of developing countries, are taken into account to ensure its sustainability and legitimacy. The reform should aim to rectify imbalances in areas such as agriculture subsidies that distort international trade and undermine food security in many developing countries. WTO reform should further enable developing countries to bolster their infant industries and access technologies. In addition, it's imperative that the discussions on WTO reform are held through the General Council and its regular sessions to guarantee transparency, openness and inclusivity without compromising the legitimacy and outcomes of this vital task. A functional, independent and effective dispute settlement system is also crucial for upholding the rights and obligations of all WTO members and ensuring fair and impartial enforcement of the rules. The South African government has been actively pursuing regulatory reforms to reduce trade-related costs and enhance the ease of doing business. These reforms encompass heightened investments in infrastructure aimed at revitalizing key transportation corridors crucial for the export of goods. Notable projects include the expansion of the Durban port and the modernization of the freight rail system to allow private rail operators access to the network, all contributing to decreased logistics costs and improved trade efficiency. Our country also boasts a robust constitutional and legislative framework that looks ahead when it comes to regulating e-commerce, ensuring robust protections for personal information and advancing access to finance for women. Notably, the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act stands as the primary legislation governing e-commerce in South Africa. And likewise, the Protection of Personal Information Act oversees the processing of personal data, necessitating that businesses implement stringent security measures for its safeguarding. Non-compliance can result in significant fines and penalties. In conclusion, as we navigate the challenges of the 21st century, the adaptation of global governance becomes increasingly imperative. The reform agenda must gain traction, and G20 parliaments must lead in advocating for a truly representative, legitimate, inclusive and fair system of global governance. I thank you.
Seguimos com a próxima oradora, a presidente do Parliamentary, senhora Blanca Margarita Avelarde Duarte.
Señor presidente, buenos días a todos. La gobernanza en el mundo actual debe abordar tanto los nuevos retos como los desafíos remanentes que tienen el potencial de agudizarse.
becoming worse. It's important that the parliaments focus their attention and the actions in the social differences that are marked by the impacts of the climate change, of disasters, in the forced deployments, in the harming the human rights, and also the impact of the technologies in the daily life of everyone. For all those challenges, complex challenges, it's fundamental that we work in joint work and cooperational work. The cooperation, the solidarity between the nations, and the multilateralism will contribute to the strategies in national level and regional level as well, so we can face these challenges that were mentioned before, from the governmental actions until the harmonization of the existing actions. The national parliaments should be part of the negotiation processes and also of the regional commitments, international commitments, so that in an assertive way they can generate the public policies in the legal frameworks that respond to the challenges of our current contexts. So the high-level spaces of regional coordination should be present, and this forum, this summit of presidents and other fora for the parliaments as well should be fundamental to keep discussing and arriving to agreements between the countries to promote the parliamentary diplomacy, to guarantee the promotion of the human rights. We have to reject the authoritarianism and also the public administration abuses, everything that goes against the rule of law, so that we can include people, so we can respect people and respect the regional international treaties on the matters we are discussing, like just as the Inter-American letter. These topics were mentioned in the Assembly of Americas and the 8th meeting of the Open Parliament of our network. And these entities, we arrived to the conclusion to discuss to focus on the discussion of the human rights and the promotion of democracy with the result for everyone. On the other hand, I would like to mention, looking towards the future and to conclude my speech, that we should consider with the countries of the G20, we should have an important consideration in regards to the science and the productive applications. This immediate unfolding of the science that can be a factor that should be more considered to avoid inequality. This fourth scientific industrialization, and with the AI, has administrated in a solidarity framework and a fraternal framework that can be for the promotion of development, but can also be something that can make worse the inequalities between the nations. With AI, we have an extraordinary tool not only for education, for health, for the promotion of the society, but it's also a tool for the to combat the organized crime. And how can we make this tool to be democratized in a solidary way? How can we make that to be democratized in a fair way? That's something that we have to consider, especially in the South Globe, those who suffer the most with the problems we are talking about here. It's an element, it's an issue that we have to think, because science is neutral, and the big organizations, they are funding the knowledge, and sometimes they are going to take their ideologies and put into science, and those who are the poorest are going to suffer the most, and they are going to be affected by the transformative power of these tools. So thank you so much for listening to me.
I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of the Indonesian ambassador, Edir Yusuf, the ambassador of Russia, Alexei Libetsky, the ambassador of India, Suresh Reddy. The next speaker in the tribune, the Vice President of the High Chamber of the Russian Parliament, Konstantin Kosachev.
Next year, we have several important anniversaries. These are the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and the foundation of the UN, and the 30th anniversary of WTO. In July this year, we celebrated the 80th anniversary of the Bretton Woods Conference, which resulted in the foundation of IMF and the World Bank. But the modern world is very different from the world we had 80 or even 30 years ago. Global governance institutes were established by the victors of the World War II. Their effective work was guaranteed by the balance of interests of top global players. In the late 20th century, the USSR ceased to exist, which led to the loss of such balance, and the group of those who thought themselves to be winners in the Cold War was left alone in the international scene. But has this new reality turned out to be better? Better ask the people in Libya, in Iraq, Yugoslavia, Syria, and Afghanistan, who lived through the attempts to export democratization. But instead of prosperity and security, they caught the dissolution of their nations, poverty and famine, onset of terrorism, and a very profound migration crisis. Today we witness in Africa, in the Middle East, and Ukraine what this unipolar policy and reckless meddling in internal affairs of sovereign nations result in. We witness the destruction of global security mechanisms, devaluation of international law, and disregard for its fundamental norms and principles in many countries and international organizations. They are unnecessarily invalidated as a result of global standards. The Western world tries to save the unipolar world, so beneficial for them at all costs, to still have the possibility to force their own interest upon the global majority to establish the rules-based order. Despite the fact of the UN Charter must be the main source of international law, many Western countries nevertheless constantly disregard the principle of equality. They abuse their monopoly of the two world currencies, and the interbank payment system control the largest international governance institutes, such as the World Bank, the IMF, and the WTO, and never cease to try to take under control such a universal organization as the UN. The world needs to develop legal mechanisms of multipolarity, including a reform of the UN. The new world order must ensure clear interpretation of norms, ban extraterritorial application of national law, and allow collective sanctions only with approval from the UN Security Council. In this speech at the BRICS summit in Russia, UN Secretary General, during the same BRICS summit in Kazan, President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, highlighted the need to adapt the UN to the realities of the 21st century to make it function effectively in the future. But it has also not been sufficiently reflected in the governance system of the IMF and the World Bank and other multilateral development banks. The pressure from the supporters of the unipolar world has resulted in the evolution of BRICS format and consolidation of the actual global majority around the values promoted by BRICS. Today, this organization has become one of the key international platforms for cooperation that adhere to the principle of multilateralism when discussing global and regional problems. It has no dominating side to dictate of the chosen ones that bear the white man's burden. In BRICS, we promote diplomacy, dialogue, negotiation, and mediation. We think that BRICS mission is of the reformation of the Global Governance Institute, offering the entire world a set of solutions for the sake of international peace and security. These recommendations have been recorded to the Kazan Declaration of BRICS. It's BRICS that can play a key role, key part in discussing UN reform. Russia traditionally calls for the entire international community, including parliaments, to join forces to combat global crises. To do so, we must do with our democracy summits that divide countries. In these times of crisis diplomacy, the role of interparliamentary cooperation is greater than ever before. One of the most important areas of work is regard to promote the idea of unacceptability of sanctions against parliamentarians. Parliamentary diplomacy is a high priority area to work for the Federal Assembly. Dear colleagues, Russian Federation is ready at all levels, professional and parliamentary democracy is ready to pay great contribution to the reform of the global governance institutes. You can count on our contribution. Thank you very much for your attention.
We'd like to mention the presence of the ambassador of South Africa, Walton Bella, the ambassador of Equatorial Guinea, Bem-vindo, Otogo Bono. Also, I'd like to mention that the ambassador Emmanuel Marianax of Canada is representing the President of the Upper House. Now we hand the floor to the Vice President of the Parliament of the United Emirates.
Here, Mr. Tariq Al-Tayer.
Good morning, Your Excellency. In the world increasingly defined by independent and by evolving rapid changes, it is evident that our traditional understanding of governance must evolve. The conventional definitions of governance, bound by national borders and limited by local policies, which fall short of addressing today's complex interconnected challenges. Governance is no longer merely the exercise of authority within borders. It is the art of coordinating collective aspirations with shared responsibility, of creating flexible framework that transcend national interest to foster common values and sustainable growth. The urgency for this governance transformation indeed is highlighted by three undeniable realities that currently shape our coexistence, realities that demand collective responses. First, in an age of globalization, any crisis is no longer contained within the borders of a single country or region. Environmental crises, for example, do not respect boundaries, of which climate change alone is projected to cost the global economy over $23 trillion by the year 2050 if left unaddressed, impacting South and North nations alike, while the extreme weather phenomena may force up to 1.2 billion to emigrate by 2035, particularly from the south to the north. Secondly, the response to these crises can no longer fall on a single nation or region as well. In a world of eroded geographical boundaries, or coordinated global response is essential. The 2008 financial crisis and COVID-19 pandemic are crystal clear examples illustrating that national borders couldn't be effective shield to diminish their global devastating effects. Lastly, we are navigating in a digital era where data and technology accelerate at unprecedented speed, creating enormous opportunity and deep inequalities. Altogether, this era, with information flowing across borders instantly, has much widened the digital divide between developed and developing nations, and has created new challenges related to privacy, credibility, and ethical data use. Accordingly, these realities highlight the need for renewed concept of governance, one that embraces both national and global responsibilities, one that is adaptive, inclusive, and forward-thinking, capable of addressing the unique challenge of the 21st century far beyond national borders. For example, at the political level, we all live in a multipolar world that is marked by diverse ideologies and interact aspirations. Unchecked geopolitical tension risk destabilizing regions and compromising global peace. Effective governance, therefore, must champion coexistence, tolerance, dialogue to ensure peace, security, and human rights. The same can be said as regards technologically, whereby the rapid digital transformation, which brings both opportunities and challenges, demand governance structure that ensure equitable access to digital tools and protect individual privacy. Otherwise, the digital divide will only grow and technological disparities will only deepen. In this endeavor, the UAE exemplifies an adaptive, forward-thinking approach guided by distinct vision and prioritize sustainability, economic diversification, and social cohesion. The UAE has embraced inclusive and innovative practices. Initiatives like Green Agenda and National Innovation Strategy underscore its commitment to sustainable growth. Esteemed colleagues, in this evolving governance landscape, parliamentaries have an indispensable role. On the national level, parliaments need to shape legislation that align with both national interests and global responsibilities. And on the regional and international level, parliaments, through interparliamentary dialogue and multilateral forums, should collaborate to create platforms that foster a coordinated approach to shared challenges. Allow me, we stand here united in purpose to call upon you to turn our thoughts to the innocent civilians in Gaza, Palestine, and Lebanon, whose suffering rings far beyond borders and whose thirst and hunger burden all of us. As a global community, the hardships are not theirs alone, but shared human tragedy that appeal to our collective conscience. And so, the world stands in urgent need to peace, of a peace that is more than an absence of collective or war, but a principle and a belief rooted to coexistence, tolerance, and compassion for one another. Despite the global consensus on international humanitarian law, clear double standards still persist in addressing crises around the world.
Next speaker On the floor, the Vice President of the High Chamber of Spain, Mr. Javier Maroto Hansaval.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most visible challenges we face is energy security, especially in providing natural gas and oil to our countries. After Russia committed an illegal and cruel aggression against Ukraine, many countries have forced to seek diversified and reliable energy sources. We must work together to invest in more renewable sources and innovative energy solutions to meet both domestic demands and support a sustainable future. Climate change is another issue of common concern. Desertification, droughts, and extreme weather patterns are becoming common every day, displacing communities, disrupting agriculture, and exacerbating resource scarcity. And ladies and gentlemen, killing people has happened in the Brazilian city of Porto Alegre, where 183 people lost their lives, or as we sadly are observing these days in my home country, Spain, where 219 people have died in Valencia. And we must not lose sight of another threat that transcends borders: terrorism. We should confront terrorism in all its forms because the threat is evolving and growing. Terrorist groups exploit weak governance, recruit vulnerable populations, and target areas already destabilized by economic and social hardships. The terrorist attack of September 11 against the United States, the terrorist attack of March 2004 against Spain, or the last terrorist attack of October the 7th against Israel are just some examples of hatred transformed into terrorism. But the main split in 21st century may not be between democracies and totalitarian regimes, but rather between human beings and non-human agents. A completely new kind of information is emerging, controlled by the decisions and goals of the artificial intelligence. Information for information deals are already here. Each day, millions of us make a lot of transactions with the tech giants. We get information from them, and we pay them with information. As more transactions follow this model, the information economy grows at the expense of the money economy. So we should be able to develop a new tax system. Taxing only money distorts the economy and political picture. Some of the wealthiest entities in the country are paying zero taxes because their wealth consists of megabytes of data rather than billions of dollars or euros. My last topic is globalism. Marine Le Pen, leader of the National Front Party in France, said, "The cleavage no longer separates left and right, but globalists and patriots." In August 2020, President Trump said, "We have rejected globalism and embraced patriotism." Luckily, this binary position is mistaken in its basic assumption. Global cooperation and patriotism are not mutually exclusive. For patriotism isn't about hating foreigners, it is about loving our compatriots. And there are many situations when, in order to take care of our compatriots, we need to cooperate with foreigners. COVID-19 provided us with one obvious example. Pandemics are global events, and without global cooperation, it is hard to contain them, let alone prevent them. Contrary to what populists argue, globalism doesn't mean abandoning national loyalties or opening borders to unlimited immigration. In fact, global cooperation means a commitment just to some global rules. These rules don't deny the uniqueness of each nation. They just regulate the relation between nations. A good model is football rules. Brazil cannot play football against Spain unless Brazilians and Spaniards first agree on the same set of rules for the game. That's globalism in action. So let's win this match together. Thank you.
Como última oradora a ocupar a tribuna nesta
as the last
sessão de
speaker to be
discussões,
in the tribune for this session of discussions, the Vice President of Pan-African Parliament, Ms. Lúcia Maria dos Passos.
Muito obrigada, Sr. Presidente. Permita, através de si, cumprimentar todos os presidentes dos parlamentos e senados aqui presentes, os senhores deputados, bem como os membros do corpo diplomático. Com uma voz que encarna as aspirações populares, os parlamentos influenciam as decisões e ajudam a criar uma governação global mais humana e resiliente que permita enfrentar também grandes desafios, desde as alterações climáticas, as desigualdades socioeconômicas e de género, migrações e a saúde pública, o terrorismo, governos inconstitucionais e até cibercrime. Essas questões, por vezes, põem em causa o papel crucial dos parlamentos nesta vasta cena internacional. Os parlamentos são a espinha dorsal da democracia representativa,
They are
torna
the backbone
para legitimar as iniciativas de governança global
legitimate world government in a world that is interconnected today, guaranteeing that the voices of people are taken into account in international decision-making. As we ratify international treaties defining priorities and hold the government accountable, the parliaments enable the oversight of these global treaties and the transparency in the efforts of global government as we tackle the challenges of the 21st century. The challenges of the 21st century as the climate change, pandemics, and migration. They demand coordinated and trans-border responses. The parliamentary overseeing of the national contribution of international bodies with reports of regular analysis of the international budget guarantee that international organizations can work efficiently, increasing transparency and accountability of these institutions. Parliamentary commissions and groups center the climate resilience matters and also green innovation and the combat to poverty and food insecurity. They can be a platform for the legislative alignment with global frameworks such as the Paris Agreement, the World Trade Organization, and the development goals, sustainable goals. The Inter-African Parliament, European Union, Parliamentary, and Arabic Parliament, they offer channels for the exchange of knowledge, harmonization of laws, and collective advocacy, allowing parliaments to work together across borders, having the alignment of the fulfillment of the resolutions carried out recently in New York in the Summit of the Future. As technology transforms society very quickly, the parliaments can and must be leaders, establishing legal frameworks to regulate emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, to guarantee that the technological advancement will support and not jeopardize the democratic governance, using the digital tools for governance transparency and connect parliaments to citizens beyond borders, allowing broader participation in the debates of global governance. In a world that faces transnational crises, the parliaments are valuable allies to make the citizens closer to a more participative and human governance. It is up to us, parliamentarians, to face the challenges of this governance in constant evolution with clarity and hard work. P20 can provide a valuable contribution to the promotion of gender equality and change in the global political ordering through the parliamentary diplomacy in the national parliament for the approval of the parity law 4060 up to 2030. Together, we can do it. Thank you very much.
Now that we've heard the speeches of everyone enrolled, now we will begin the closing session of the 10th Parliamentary Speakers Summit of the G20. I declare this session closed. As we said, I now open the closing session of the 10th G20 Parliamentary Speakers Summit. To make up the table together with this presidency, Mrs. President of the Interparliamentary Union, Julia Hanson. The presidency would like to communicate that due to family issues, the president of the Federal Senate, Senator Rodrigo Pacheco, will not be able to participate in the closing session. The presidency has the satisfaction of informing that in our conversations and consultations along the last few months, through a transparent and inclusive process and with a wide-reaching and constructive participation of parliaments of G20 members, of guest countries, and the Interparliamentary Union, all of this has resulted in a joint declaration that was circulated by the P20 presidency in November the 8th, 2024. The presidency would like to highlight and to thank the constructive spirit that everyone involved manifested throughout the consultation processes, even in relation to the most complex, thorniest topics. Under these conditions, I'd then like to propose that this summit adopts the joint declaration of parliaments for a fair world and a sustainable planet. Adopted, therefore. Ladies and gentlemen, in the light of negotiations around our joint declaration, the President, under the responsibility of acting as the facilitator of consensus, also makes the following speech coming from the presidency. I'd like to emphasize, as the President, that this manifestation is an essential part of the path that has brought us to the adoption of the joint declaration. In the context of the 10th G20 Parliamentary Speakers Summit, which took place in Brasilia in November the 7th and 8th, 2024, some members and other participants manifested their points of view on issues of a geopolitical nature involving, among others, Russia and Ukraine, and the situation in the Middle East, especially in relation to Gaza and Lebanon. Some members and other participants considered that these issues should be dealt with in P20 since they impact the world economy and priority themes discussed in this very summit. The fight against hunger, poverty, and inequality, sustainable development, and the construction of global governance adapted to the 21st century. On the other hand, all other members and participants considered that the P20 is not an adequate forum to discuss these issues. In my opening speech of the summit, I renewed an appeal that every parliament should be engaged in the promotion of peace, with special attention given to the protection of life of civilians and innocent people. I also reminded that as representatives of your peoples, parliaments should increase their mobilization around international agreements directed towards peace. Despite the fact that different points of view were expressed throughout the summit, the P20 should, in the vision of this presidency, strengthen its capacity to really be a robust and inclusive platform ruled under the consensus principle to lead to greater cooperation between the presidents of G20 parliaments. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Her Excellency, the Vice President of the National Parliament of South Africa, Anneli Loitziet, to the table and to symbolically receive the presidency of P20. At this time, I'd like to invite you all to watch a video offered by the South African delegation, the next country to take on the P20 presidency.
This is who we are. More than 60 million different voices echoing in harmony from the southernmost part of the continent, where ordinary people have carved their names in an extraordinary history by showing the world that peace is always better than war. Our reach is not limited by our borders, bringing joy in people's hearts and a spark of rhythm to their moves. This is the welcome home of opportunity, inspiring millions to look here in search of a better life, and sharing our best with the world. We are home to undulating mountains, flowers, endless seas, the beautiful animal kingdom, and the ever-changing seasons that color our world. We are the birthplace of humanity and a showcase of human excellence. We believe in South Africa. We are inspired by our victories of the past and our strong institutions to overcome the challenges of today and build a better tomorrow. This is who we are, South African. South Africa, inspiring new ways.
This is a message by Brand South Africa.
I now have the honor to give the floor to the Vice President of the National Assembly of South Africa, Annelie Lotriet.
Honourable President Rodrigo Pacheco, Honourable President Arthur Lira, Honourable President of the IPU Tulia Axon, Honourable Presiding Officers of G20 Parliaments, distinguished Members of Parliament and G20 countries, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. I address you today on behalf of the Parliament of South Africa with a deep sense of gratitude. We extend our sincere appreciation to the Parliament of Brazil and the Interparliamentary Union for graciously hosting and warmly welcoming the parliamentary representatives of G20 countries at this highly successful P20 Summit of Speakers. Let us collectively express our gratitude for the generous hospitality extended by our esteemed hosts throughout our stay. Muito obrigado, Honourable President Rodrigo Pacheco, Honourable President Arthur Lira, and Honourable Tulia Axon. It fills me with great pride to convey that South Africa is poised to assume the presidency of the G20 starting December the 1st this year. This indeed makes an historic moment, not only for our nation, but for the entire African continent, as it signifies the very first G20 summit to be held on African soil. We eagerly anticipate the opportunity to reciprocate the warmth and hospitality we have been fortunate to receive. Honourable colleagues, under South Africa's 2025 presidency, the overarching theme that will guide all G20 engagements is solidarity, equality, and sustainable development. This theme is a testament to our nation's unwavering commitment to addressing global challenges through robust multilateralism, with the United Nations serving as the cornerstone of this effort. It is our firm belief that by strengthening international cooperation within the formal rules and commitments that our countries agree to, we can achieve solidarity, peace, equality, human rights, and sustainable development for the betterment of all. In alignment with this vision, South Africa remains steadfast in advocating for the needs and aspirations of Africa and the Global South. We are resolute in our stance for the reform of global governance institutions, endeavouring to render them more representative and responsive to the requirements of the developing world. Moreover, South Africa is committed to accelerating programs aimed at achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. With just 6 years remaining until the 2030 deadline, it is essential for us to acknowledge that global progress towards achieving the SDG targets is perilously behind schedule. Dear colleagues, we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. Honourable parliamentarians, the 2025 P20 Summit of Speakers will serve as a pivotal platform for parliamentarians to reflect on these critical global issues from a parliamentary perspective. It is our vision to engage in profound discourse on the role our legislative bodies can and should play in ensuring adherence to multilateralism, contributing to fair and inclusive global governance reform, fostering peace through dialogue, and driving progress towards the SDGs while averting a climate crisis. As lawmaking authorities, parliaments hold significant power. We possess the ability to ensure that our country's laws align with the commitments of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. We must critically evaluate whether our national laws and policies, notably our nationally determined contributions, are sufficient to address climate change mitigation and adaptation across various policy areas, notably to protect the most vulnerable in our societies. If inadequacies are identified, these must be addressed. The 2024 UN Nationally Determined Contributions Synthesis Report published on 28 October 2024, alarmingly indicates that current national climate plans fall short of what is needed to prevent global heating from devastating economies and jeopardizing countless lives and livelihoods worldwide. This report stresses the pressing need for bold, new national climate plans to avert climate chaos, urging stronger investment, economic growth and opportunity, among various other benefits. Clearly, we have our work cut out for us. Furthermore, as oversight bodies, parliaments are entrusted with the responsibility of enforcing accountability. We have the authority to hold our governments accountable for their actions or inactions in the face of the myriad challenges confronting our world. It is incumbent upon us to pose demanding questions, insist on substantive answers, and rigorously follow up on our inquiries. In South Africa, our constitution empowers parliamentary committees to summon any person to appear before them to give evidence on oath or affirmation or to produce documents. I'm also excited to share that our National Assembly Rules Committee recently, on October the 31st, agreed upon several new rules and guidelines aimed at enhancing the effectiveness of the 7th Democratic Parliament. This includes the establishment of a dedicated oversight committee on the presidency, further reinforcing our existing parliamentary oversight mechanisms. Our institutions are also responsible for approving the national budget. Thus, we play a pivotal role in ensuring that our government's budgets and commitments are aligned with overarching developmental priorities. Furthermore, significantly, we must guarantee that government spending remains transparent and geared towards just causes and the upliftment of those most at risk. I underscore these powers, honourable members, particularly in the light of the concerns expressed by our constituents regarding the limited accountability of the G20. The G20 has faced criticism regarding its lack of transparency. As the P20, serving as the representative arms of our governments, we are uniquely positioned to address this gap through our parliamentary mandates. As the elected representatives of our nations, we are strategically positioned to facilitate transparency and public access to the G20's work. At P20 engagements, we can also share valuable information among ourselves to ultimately strengthen domestic oversight over our government's implementation of G20 commitments. Evidently, much is within our purview to advance the SDGs through various parliamentary avenues at our disposal. South Africa, therefore, is enthused about hearing your insights, ideas and strategies pertaining to the role of the P20 in fortifying the efforts of the G20. In closing, honourable colleagues, South Africa eagerly anticipates hosting you in the Rainbow Nation in 2025. I thank you.
I now have the honor to give the floor to the President of the Interparliamentary Union, Mr. Duliax.
Your Excellency, the President of the Lower House of Brazil, Federal Deputy Arthur Lira, the Vice President of the Parliament of South Africa, Ms. Annelie Lotriet, distinguished speakers of Parliament, dear colleagues, dear friends. We have just concluded 3 busy days of our work that has given us the opportunity for fruitful exchanges of good practices and opportunities of collaboration that should enable us to advance the ambitious objectives that together we have set for ourselves. I salute the leadership of the Brazilian Parliament in guiding our work under the overall theme of Parliaments for a Just World and a Sustainable Planet. On the issues of hunger, poverty, and inequality, I am encouraged by the scope and breadth of our discussions, which have enabled us to identify a number of solutions and causes of action. Given the collective size of the G20's resources, there is no doubt that the means should not be lacking, and that renewed action should be undertaken to effectively address these challenges, the devastating consequences of which we are painfully aware of. With solidarity, courage, and political will, we can live up to the expectations of our people for a better and more sustainable future. Without a doubt, the 10th P20 Summit in Brasilia has put the people, and in particular the women of this world, back at the center of our attention. We have all agreed that we need to advance gender equality as a precondition for inclusive growth and sustainable development. With this in mind, we must redouble our efforts to promote women's rights and the political and economic empowerment of women, while firmly combating discrimination and violence against women. The recommendations of the first ever P20 meeting of women parliamentarians in Marseille should henceforth be a reference for our work on this front. Dear colleagues, dear friends, time is not on our side. The 2030 deadline for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals is just around the corner, and we are seriously off target. We have agreed that we need decisive, inclusive, and forward-thinking policies. It is within our reach to turn our ambitious goals into actionable laws and budgets that resonate with the needs of our respective communities. We have agreed that our parliaments must lead in driving climate action and resilience. In just over a week's time, our parliaments will be assembling in the context of the parliamentary meeting at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, this time in Baku, Azerbaijan. This will be an opportunity to take stock of the results of our work thus far. But clearly, so much more needs to be done. I call on all of you to decisively act ahead of the 10 actions we have collectively identified to strengthen national climate commitments and to share the results of your interventions. I very much welcome the fact that despite our differences and a very difficult international environment, we have been able to come together here and reach consensus on a very substantive and comprehensive joint statement, which sets forth specific causes of parliamentary action to combat hunger, poverty, and inequality around the world, ensure just and inclusive transitions towards sustainable development, and help build a more equitable and representative global governance. Dear colleagues, dear friends, we now need to take this joint statement back home, roll up our sleeves, and get to work in making sure that our words are corresponding by concrete action and results. I would like to echo the point made yesterday by the Deputy Speaker of South Africa, when she said that it is untenable to continue with P20 declarations without a serious tracking and reporting mechanism. I totally agree, as we too are accountable for the promises that we make. We look forward to working closely with the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa in the lead-up to the next P20 Summit next year, to see how we could push such a mechanism in place. To conclude, I would like to appreciate again our gracious Brazilian hosts for their warm hospitality, hard work, and strong commitment to multilateralism and parliamentary diplomacy. We very much value your contribution to the work of IPU, Mr. President, and look forward to supporting you as you embark on another very busy year as chair of both BRICS and the 30th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, COP30, both of which hold an important parliamentary component. As for the IPU, we shall continue to deploy all possible efforts to provide a meaningful platform for political dialogue and engagement, help build strong and effective parliaments, and enhance parliamentary dimension to global governance. We very much look forward to welcoming all of you to Geneva in late July 2025 for the 6th World Conference of Speakers of Parliament, organized in collaboration with the United Nations. The 15th Summit of Women Speakers of Parliament, which will be hosted by the Swiss Parliament in Bern, will precede this meeting. It has been an honor, once again, dear colleagues and friends, and a pleasure to be a part of this wonderful P20 Summit. And I would like to thank all of you for your confidence, friendship, and contribution. I wish you all the best in the exercise of your very important responsibilities, and I look forward to even closer engagements ahead. Now that the presidents for P20 and G20 will be going to South Africa, I would like to quote two remarkable leaders of the African continent. One is President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. He once said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." At the same time, my own father of the nation, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, who served as President of the United Republic of Tanzania, once said, "It can be done, play your part." I thank you for listening.
Senhoras e senhores presidentes de parlamento,
dear ladies and gentlemen, presidents of parliaments, Mr. President of Inter-Parliamentary Union, Ms. Tuliakson, and the President of the National Assembly of South Africa, Annelie Lutrat, and other delegation, chiefs of delegations, parliamentaries, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of diplomatic bodies. Dear ladies and gentlemen, with a double feeling of gratitude and satisfaction that I address to the members of P20. I think the hard work of all delegations with the broad participation and attendance in debates with the relevant contributions that you provided. And especially a special greeting to Brazilian parliamentarians, federal representatives, senators, for the cooperation and enthusiasm since the first moment. Also, I would like to thank the international organizations that were present with a special mention to the Inter-Parliamentary Union, a partner since the very first moment in the organization of this summit. I'd like to highlight as well the acknowledgement and my gratitude to the workers of the Chamber of Deputies, without the competent education and also the workers of the Senate, this event wouldn't have been successful as it was. I also share the feeling of satisfaction, complete satisfaction of reaching what we have reached as the presidents of G20. Dear parliamentarians, in the summit in New Delhi, October 2023, when we received this responsibility from the hands of the Parliament of India, our dear friends, until today, when we hand it to the Parliamentary of South Africa, Brazil employed the best efforts to strengthen P20 as a key piece in the scope of G20. If the Parliament is the place for discussions of the society, the union of parliaments could not be something else other than the stage of important debates of the problems and global problems and challenges. G20 gathering the most important economies in the world is in charge of sharing what is impacting the lives of people. That's the goal of politics. It's clear that P20 should and must provide a contribution to G20 in the debate of global issues, making the parliaments closer to the decision-making processes and facilitate the implementation of agreements in each country. Understanding that the parliamentary diplomacy has relevance, increasing relevance in the multilateral agreements. It calls our attention the importance, the growing importance in dialogue in the world marked by the volatility of the geopolitical balance. Here, today, we are together as representatives of our peoples. We cannot be absent of the search of the development that will build solid bases to peace and prosperity. This motto is very timely. Parliament for a fair and sustainable world. Until when women and men of all peoples have dreamed with this ideal. Humanity never had so many resources to reach it. And then we must insist in the search for a better world, a more prosperous, Pacific world. A dialogue among nations is a key means for us to reach this goal. However, there is no justice with people in hunger. There is no justice when poverty and inequality are present in the lives of billions of people. The working session on this topic was very fruitful, and it gains more relevance in a scenario in which the world is still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. Sustainable development is also a very urgent topic and requires bold and shared decisions. In the past 2 years, we approved in this Chamber of Deputies a robust and broad set of measures for environmental preservation and energy transition, facing all the international efforts on climate change. It is clear the importance of the debates we had in the sustainability working session, viewing the proximity of COP29 in Azerbaijan, starting in a few days. Dear ladies and gentlemen, if we wish that global challenges are properly debated and resolved, and the international institutions to be respected in their accepted decisions, it is unavoidable to deal with the reform of global governance. We want to have more transparent international institutions and also more representative. Therefore, it is paramount the approval of the United Nations in September for the Pact of the Future that has specific actions over global governance. Therefore, it deserves all the compliments, the debaters, and the speakers on global governance adapted to the challenges of the 21st century. a topic that tends to gain strength in the multilateral forums and in our parliament. I would like to take this opportunity of the reflection of global challenges to reiterate the importance of the participation of women in the creation of a more equitable and inclusive reality. Allow me once again to underline the pioneering of the first summit of parliamentary women of P20, which gives Brazil an immense pride. Carried out in July this year in the city of Maceió, an event led by women, and its final document was part of the debates of this summit. The Charter of Alagoas is part of the history of P20, and I'm certain that it will have long-lasting effects on the direction of this group. Before finishing, dear parliamentarians, I would like to show my solidarity in the efforts of the delegations present here, in the sense of reverberating the fruit of these meetings in your own legislative houses, and also to the state and government chiefs and civil society. I have the conviction of the importance of parliamentary diplomacy in our time, and we count on your help. The delegation of South Africa, on behalf of the presidency of P20, I wish you success in the leadership of this group next year. We're going to be available to support you whenever you need. As we finish this conference, I restate my joy, and I believe it's shared by everyone present here, having this substantive dialogue established with constructive ideas being shared here, and important proposals for future actions were presented here. Bonds of cooperation and friendship were strengthened, and my renewed thanks to you, I wish, on behalf of the Brazilian Chamber of Deputies, a good return home to you all. Thank you.
Before we finish the solemn session, I would like to sincerely thank all authorities present here today and everyone who honored us by being here. And we'd like to close the session. Thank you.